So welcome everyone to the fifth session on experiencing no self. We're exploring the two truths doctrine, which looks at the ultimate and relative truth. And this is something I usually teach later in a series like this, but I thought I'd move it up more to the beginning, partly because of the questions that are coming up around, how to well, if everything's empty, then what do we do in the world, and why bother, and if everything. There's no self, then why work on any self-improvement? And those statements were made, but that's kind of what the ego comes up with a resistance to the teaching sometimes as those thoughts arise. So just to recap a bit, we've explored how we are not our thoughts and our emotions that arise, that they're empty and ephemeral. We also saw how struggle, that the ego's grasping and pushing away, that keeps us in the trance, really in a trance of the conditioned realm. With the misperception that we are an ego or a self. And this is really the misperception that's behind our suffering. So during this exploration, and questions came up. How do the experiences that arise and seem so real fit with the emptiness of everything? Right, and that's a very real question that arises for us. For example, one person asked about working to improve themselves. That's something that they would still like to do, and how does this fit with the notion of no self? If there's no self, what's there to improve? That always reminds me of Suzuki Roshi's famous saying, "You're perfect just the way you are, but you could use a little improvement." Right, and that's one of those paradoxical pith teachings, right? And it really gets to the core of what we'll be exploring together tonight. How those two things can both be true at the same time. How do we act in the world, right? If everything's just arising without our consent or control, how can we affect anything that's going on in our lives or the world? It's another question that comes up. And these are common, very common questions that arise as people engage with these kinds of teachings. So we're going to really explore how experiencing, or you could say living our lives, is transformed. So the way we engage in the world is transformed when we see its true nature, the true nature of what's arising, when we see the empty nature of everything. So we can see how the particular of our lives leads to the ultimate. So just to define some terms here before we get too far along, the Buddhist doctrine of two truths differentiates between two levels of reality. Okay, so there's and reality is the Pali word is sacca, S-A-C-C-A. So the two truths points to one of the truths being what you could call the conventional or the relative truth, the saṁvṛti truth. And the other is often referred to as the absolute or the ultimate truth, the paramārtha truth. So some people use other words like I've heard personal and essential being used. Personal referring to the conventional, because it seems very personal, right? What's arising in that conventional, ordinary, in our ordinary lives. So these are the two truths that we'll be exploring, and in fact, we'll see how they're not actually two truths, really, but more two facets of one truth, the one jewel of your life. There are two facets, you could say. So it's important that we understand both truths and to live with the realization of both. So we're not rejecting the ordinary, sort of conventional truth, right? Sometimes it may sound like that we want to see the ultimate. We're really rejecting the conventional, the relative world. But that's not what it's about. It's about understanding both. As Nagarjuna said, and Nagarjuna is really brought, was it 8th century, I believe, practitioner and writer, and who really, you could say, started Mahayana Buddhism. Many of the texts are the core teachings for Mahayana Buddhism. And he wrote a lot about the two truths doctrine. To quote him, without a foundation in the conventional truth, the significance of the ultimate truth cannot be taught. Without understanding the significance of the ultimate, liberation is not achieved. So he continually points to the importance of understanding both realms. So when sometimes when we start to practice, there's often a craving to connect with the ultimate, right? We want to connect with God or the Buddha nature. There's this real pull. Actually, it's deeper than craving. It's an existential pull. Sometimes people refer to it as a calling. It actually gets to the point where you really have no control over whether you practice or not. It's just takes on a life of its own because the pull is much stronger than anything the ego can come up with. So we start with this pull, but sometimes that can lead to us wanting to get out of the chaos, right? Because the relative world can seem very, very chaotic and confusing, with a lot of suffering in it. So there can be this desire to get out of the relative and really rest in the ultimate realm. And that's not really what this practice is all about. It's about understanding both and living both, living in the conventional world from the understanding of seeing the ultimate truth. So we don't want to get caught in either, right? We don't want to get caught in the relative, which is really how most of humanity lives. They're caught up in the chaos of the relative world unfolding, seeing it as very personal and solid, believing that satisfaction and happiness can be found there. We don't want to get, so we realize that getting caught up in that brings suffering. We also don't want to sort of get caught up in emptiness, just seeing emptiness and not seeing how it fits with the relative. So both realms are actually equally true, right? So both are true, and we see how they're interconnected. So as you know, many of you know, I practiced for years tantric tantra yoga, and tantra actually means or it points to the interwovenness of the word actually translates to weave. Tantra is weave, the interwovenness of the sacred, spiritual, ultimate world and the mundane, conventional world. That they're interwoven, and this is really where we're going as we explore the no self teaching. So I'm kind of taking you to the end of the story a bit here, but and you know, and I've seen I've seen so many people get, because the ego, one of the big resistances is I can't, I have to, I act in the world. The social justice is important to me. This doesn't make any sense if everything's empty, and it can be a huge resistance. So in a way, I'm giving you a teaching that allows those thoughts to relax a bit. If you hear what I'm saying, it's kind of a compromise to the ego. So in a way, I'm talking to the ego, right? Because I'm giving you a lot of concepts and discursive ideas, and the ego can go, okay, I can see no self, and but I'll still be, there'll still be the relative ordinary world will still be there to operate in. Because of course the ego wants its cake and wants to eat it too, right? It wants to be enlightened, but it wants to be there when enlightenment occurs. It wants to be, nothing better than, for the ego than it's the big cookie, right? It's the big prize is to be enlightened. But we're not talking about that, but I'm giving you a bit of a compromise teaching or provisional teaching, you could say. So let's define what these are real quick, and then I'll open it up for some comments and so forth. So relative or conventional truth is the kind of the conventional reality that we operate in of self and other, the ordinary ways of being in the world. And it includes all the dualistic phenomenon, ourselves, other beings, material objects, thoughts, emotions, concepts in particular that kind of make up our lives in the world, the stuff that we're kind of familiar with in our everyday world. It's verbal, it's conceptual, language captures it, and concepts capture it. And because it's conceptual, it can appear as though it's static. Right? Because concepts freeze things and they can make them seem like they're ongoing through time and in some way permanent. So of course all these concepts and designations are useful. So we're not saying they're bad or we need to get rid of them. In fact, you need them for your survival. If you didn't use these the relative world, conceptual world, you actually wouldn't survive. You need to navigate the world. We needed to organize society. There's laws in the relative world. There's the laws of physics, the laws of chemistry, laws of biology, and you cannot ignore any of this. It's all very important, at least if you want to survive. But these are also sometimes called illusion, right? Because we mistakenly believe that they're solid, separate, independent realities with some essence, right? So it's not the concepts, it's the belief that we attach to them that they're somehow solid and separate, independent realities. So the problem is not the relative world or relative truth, right? Which is basically good, it's fine, necessary, but it's our misunderstanding, it's our misperception of its nature. And this is key. This is key to understand. There's no rejection here of the relative. It's just a misunderstanding of its nature. So the relative truth obscures our seeing the reality of things. So it's not the concepts that obscure, it's rather our belief that the concepts, or the belief we give to the concepts that creates the illusion of permanence and solidity. In fact, the Sanskrit term, this is very interesting, the Sanskrit term for conventional is saṁvṛti, which I mentioned, which actually translates directly to all concealing. So the word that's translated from Sanskrit is actually points directly to the sort of its nature of concealing ultimate truth. So it's really seeing this, and vipassana, which you've all heard of vipassana. This is an insight meditation group, which has its roots in Theravadan Buddhism and vipassana meditation. And vipassana is just translates to clearly seeing. So you've got these two key words, like you've got all concealing, conventional, and then you've got vipassana coming to the picture, which is directed towards clearly seeing how conventional reality obscures the reality of things. So the reality of things is revealed when we understand and see clearly, and the ultimate truth is revealed. So ultimate truth, absolute truth, universal truth, essential, whatever we might call it, is kind of the reality beyond all the concepts and beyond all the dualisms of any kind. It's also the true nature of the relative phenomenon, right? Because it's the ultimate truth. In Mahayana Buddhism, is sometimes called emptiness. It's interdependence. Interbeing, the interbeingness is a word Thich Nhat Hanh uses, the Zen master, Vietnamese Zen master. So it has those, the nirvana points to ultimate truth as well. So it's the ultimate truths pointing to the true nature of ultimately of all phenomenon. It's empty of any self or essence, but exists depending on other phenomenon, right? It's interdependent, co-arising. So it has no inherent separate, solid existence. So when we believe that the concept is existent in some substantial way, this is the illusion. Right? This is the illusion. And this is happens through, which has been pointed out in this group, it happens through our language and use of concepts. Again, just to quote Nagarjuna again, he said, that to which language refers is denied. Right? That to which language refers is denied. So the two truths is, it's sometimes called a provisional teaching in Buddhism, because it's helpful for where we are on the path, but it's not the final truth. The final truth is that there's really only one reality, and it unites the ultimate and the relative. So ultimate truth is the true nature of the relative, right? That's why it's ultimate. It's the ultimate truth of the relative, and relative truth is the manifestation of the ultimate. So there's no separating them into two, right? They're not two. And so so it's to talk about two separate truths is really a provisional teaching. It's a way for, so I guess, for us to get our heads around where these teachings might be taking us along the path. So a question for you. Why is it helpful to know this? Why did the Buddha teach the two truths doctrine? Why did Nagarjuna emphasize it? He really emphasized this two truths doctrine in his teachings. Joseph Goldstein will often will raise the two truths in his teachings. So, how can this understanding of the two truths help us along the path? What does it? How does it help us? Directly see no self is another way to look at it. So, how can it help us? Why is it helpful to even know this? I guess you could just look in your own minds, look inside and say, okay, well, what has this helped in terms of what's coming up as you practice with the no self teachings? Does it perhaps help with some of the resistances that arise in the mind when you hear the no self teachings? Right? The ego has a lot to say when it hears the no self teachings. Have you noticed? It doesn't just kind of go, oh yeah, okay, I accept that. There's really no ego, and this self-identification with the ego is the cause of this being suffering. Does it just kind of roll over that way, or does it have some comments? And does this no self-teaching help in some way? Yeah, Carl.
For me, what it makes me think of is that there's sort of a taken for grantedness that we have about things, and that we think everything's real, right? And I always thought that when something catastrophic happens, you all of a sudden realize that you're taken for granted. That what you thought was stable and ever present it can really go like that, right? And that, to me, in some ways, is something that was an awareness. It was almost like an unpacking of something that allowed you to kind of at least glimpse into that. What you think is real is my health, right? And and I could go to the doctor tomorrow, and they could say you have cancer, Carl, and I'll say, wow, I'm no longer a healthy person. So I think that kind of points to, in a sense, that kind of Buddhist notion that you have this this world that's constructed for you, or that you've constructed, and it's just that, it's a construction. And I think for me, trying to get into that ultimate reality is sort of like acknowledging the taken for granted kind of allows you to kind of at least glimpse and that there's something else too, right? There can be an ultimate reality, and how to get there is, for me, it's sort of like that Buddhist path. And that's still a pretty hard thing to do, but I think at least understanding that it's your world is made up more or less, through language, through interactions, through your idiosyncrasies or other people's. It's probably a good starting point to acknowledge that nature of reality, of what you're calling the conventional.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, really, this practice is all about seeing the true nature. Right? When you think about it, all what do? We talk about, sense consciousness arising. So there's a sense object, sense consciousness becomes part of our experience. Then a perception arises that recognizes it, and labels it, and names it. And this process just unfolds. And for most people, that's as far as it gets, right? There's just this unfolding, sense consciousness, sense object, sense organ, contact, perception, recognition, label. It just continuously pulls us around. So then we say, okay, be mindful of this. Okay, this is different. So it's not just going to happen automatically on autopilot, just doing its own thing. I'm actually going to be mindful of this unfolding process. Interesting. So why would we do that? Right? Why not just let it, we kind of know why, but it's a question. We do it because we want to observe it, notice it, so that we can see its true nature. It's the only reason. We don't practice mindfulness so that we can walk really slowly and eat really slowly and just notice things. It's not just about noticing, right? And there's really no noticer when you get right down to it. It's a stepping stone to seeing it, the true nature of everything that's arising. Right? We're seeing the true nature, and that's what's wisdom. That's what we call wisdom in these teachings. And that's the whole point of all this. So we're seeing ultimate truth. So when we're seeing this, and the kind of ultimate truth is no self. Yeah. Yes, Anita. Yeah. Hi.
Yeah. Just a thought to occurred to me when you were saying this. We're like, why is this helpful? Or sort of, I don't know. It just seemed to occur to me that and sort of following on what Carl said. We're dragged or constrained. We're dragged down or constrained by the physical world and our biology. Just the reality of life and navigating, as you talked about, in the world. And so where life keeps dragging us towards the relative. And I guess that's why some people or many people they just stay there. They don't have time or never been exposed to another way of seeing. But so I think that's how we get there. But our minds are obviously capable of more.
Yeah.
How clear that was.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. We're definitely capable of more. Yeah, so we're not rejecting any of that relative world, and I think that's, in fact, we're becoming very intimate with it. But we're becoming, we're very intimate and very concerned about the particulars of our life, the fine grain of our life. Right. So it's I just muted you there, Giovanni. There was some background noise coming through, but okay, you wanted to say something? Sorry, go ahead.
If you're done with that point, I thought you were. So.
Go ahead. Yeah, it's fine.
So I guess that my simplistic view would be that why it helps us, if because I guess according to the teaching, they're both true. So we guess what? Yeah, they make up the one truth, but that's not really my comment. It's really a question that I have, Stephen, and that is, if the emptiness is related to the ultimate truth, and that is almost like lifting the veil from the conventional one. But we also say, you also said that they are part of one reality. It's one reality. So why is it useful to not simply live in the conventional one? I guess it's because I'm sorry, in the ultimate. Why is it not useful to just live in the ultimate and living the emptiness, and living the no ego? I suppose it's because that's not the way the human brain is wired. We are just wired to live in the conventional. We just need to see it. That's not the entire truth. Is that a correct interpretation?
I'm going to mute you. You've got a lot of background noise. That's why I keep muting you. I think it's just your connection. It's not background noise. The connection. Yeah. Yeah. So why bother with the conventional at all if we can just rest in ultimate bliss? Why? Because there aren't actually two. You really can't. You can become attached to emptiness, but you can't just stay there. I mean, you can bliss out, right? We all have had the experience of bliss in our meditations, but it's an impermanent state. Those are impermanent states because the two are actually one. There's no separating ultimate and relative. So we get stuck on the relative level. We all see how that happens. We're stuck in the drama and stories and solidity of our lives. We can all see that, but we can also get stuck in the ultimate level of emptiness. I think this is probably why it's the Buddha and Nagarjuna presented the two truths. So Nagarjuna said, one of his famous quotes that always makes me chuckle. While attachment to relative truth is a problem, people who attach to emptiness are hopeless. So he really sees it being attached to emptiness as, I think another instance, the word that got translated in another quote he gave was that people that attach to emptiness are incorrigible. So he quite identifies the problem of too much emptiness. So, but I think that for me the two truths doctrine it really addresses some of the central resistances of the ego. If everything is empty, why bother? Is one of the key resistances of the ego, right? And is there anybody here that has not heard that comment from the mind? Everybody's had that comment from the mind as they go through the no self teachings. I've not met one person that hasn't had that. And it's kind of like the more you feel the importance of what happens in the relative world, the stronger that statement comes through, right? So like you teach no self-teaching to somebody that was a social activist for 30 years, fighting for social justice, and that voice is strong. The ego latches onto that resistance and says, no, you need to still have you still fight for social justice. There has to be a self. I have to be. The ego has to be involved in this. You can't do it without me, sort of thing. Or if I'm perfect just the way I am, why bother improving myself? Is another one that comes up. Of course, these are the paradoxes of the practice that continually come up, and these paradoxes can be alleviated, if that's the word, with the two truths doctrine. They can be understood. The ego can loosen a little on its resistances by hearing the two truths doctrine. Yeah. Yeah, Juna.
I know sometimes I've gotten really caught up in this idea of the absolute reality. And there's a way that I've been, I think, kind of lacking in compassion about what's happening in the relative world, about the suffering that's there, and just kind of say, well, it's all empty. So, you know, it's all kind of sound and lights and stuff, which is incredibly cold and uncompassionate, but it's a way of me kind of protecting myself against this sense of like, how do you deal with the chaos and suffering of the relative world? But I was thinking how, and it's the first time I've heard this idea that they're two sides of the same thing. And I was thinking how too much in the absolute world, and you lack compassion for the suffering that's happening in the relative world, and you get very cognitive, and too much in the relative world, and you kind of lack an understanding of the interconnectedness of everybody, and you come very self-focused. It's all about me and what I want and what, you know, satisfies my sense pleasures. And I was thinking about that quote from Nisargadatta, you know, when I look within and I see that I'm empty, that's wisdom. And when I look without and I see that I'm everything, that's love. And my life swings between the two of them. So.
Thank you. That's beautiful, and really sums up how the two wings of wisdom and compassion really are one. They're together, right? When we see ourselves from the ultimate perspective, another way to say what you said, we're freed from the delusion and struggle and confusion. And when we see there is no self in our experience and in the experience of others, right? We just see that's rising and falling. We can see the unfolding of appearances in the relative world from the eyes of the ultimate, right? From the eyes of the divine. And this frees the heart, as you said, you know, in your words, it frees the heart from this burden of preoccupation with self-concern. Right? It really does. That's when I hear the word freedom, that's for me what resonates is it's an unburdening of the heart from this preoccupation with self interest, self-concern. But it also, as you pointed out, it frees the heart from becoming overwhelmed by witnessing the suffering of others. Right? Because we know that there's no self there that is suffering. Right? So it's the compassion and wisdom coming together. Guy Armstrong, who's, you know, he has a book, it's got emptiness in the title. I know a few of you are reading the Guy Armstrong's book, Emptiness. I think it's a practical manual for meditators or something like that. It's a very practical, there it is, practical guide for meditators. Yeah, wonderful teacher. Yeah, you know, he speaks about this. Just a couple of pages in the book on this, on the two truths. But he says, seeing the ultimate truth of emptiness frees the heart, while seeing the conventional truth of beings opens the heart of compassion. Right? So it's the way that wisdom and compassion interweave through this teaching. So we're freed from self-concern, right? The more open, the more the heart is open, and more it's more compassionate. But we also see the emptiness of self everywhere, right? So we see the suffering arising in the relative world. So we need this balance. It's like a movement, right? The movement of wisdom and compassion. So we need to see when emptiness becomes a fixed view and when it closes the heart. And at the same time, we fixate on compassion, there's not an inner balance or clarity or what's the word? Peacefulness, peace needed to actually help others in the world. So you need this movement back and forth. So there's really the comes about with the integration of the two truths. That's why I said it's really one truth, because the wisdom and compassion both flow out of this truth. The way Joseph Goldstein puts it is, when you see the true nature of things and you see the ultimate reality of everything, of the world unfolding of appearances, then discernment can arise. It's interesting too, right? So seeing the ultimate truth of everything doesn't mean we don't, we just throw up our arms, say everything's empty, and why bother? It's really where you could say there is where you actually get to make decisions at this point. The rest of it, decisions are being made for you in the relative world. But when you operate from the ultimate, you can actually discern what's wholesome, what's helpful in the world, what's unwholesome, what's unhelpful, what's not true, and not act from there. So you're acting for your actions. We've talked about this too. We talked about racism in society and working for social justice around race. That we operate from the whole rather than from the ego. So that's a question you can always ask: is this coming from the whole, or is it coming from egoic self-interest? It's a really important question, because we can also delude ourselves into thinking that we've seen no self and that we're somehow operating from the whole, from the non-separation. But we have to be, we really have to look deeply to see if that's true in that moment. So, as our kind of practice, as our experience of no self matures and percolates, I like to use that word, it kind of percolates and matures, we're able to see the relative and the ultimate truth at the same time. Right? We see one reality. It's really one reality with two aspects. So we kind of move freely, feeling the freedom of emptiness in one moment and the movement of compassion in the next. So it's from this. Just go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, just I guess from my own experience, this is a really important concept in the sense of when one first goes into teachings of no self, as you said, there is that risk of sort of dismissing the relative truth, and with that, it's much easier to reject things that you may have actually enjoyed, and sort of saying, well, this stuff's ultimately meaningless, and it's a wrong way of looking at it, and you can sort of get almost a nihilistic take on it, sort of saying the only thing that really matters is this ultimate truth. And that's where I think there is, you shouldn't be rejecting these things. And the risk and something that I sort of experienced was I moved away from the Dharma for a while because of that. It was I was just sort of thinking, if this is what it means that I'm sort of leaving this stuff behind, then maybe either I'm not doing it right, which was the case, or it's actually meaningless, which it isn't. And I think that's really where this stuff comes in, is for just practitioners who are first starting with the no self. And I think it's a good reason, for you to move this up earlier in the teachings, because a lot of people will sort of start into this and saying, oh yeah, you know what, these things that I held important really aren't. They're just meaningless, right? And that's not the way to look at this. It's like you say, there's two sides to it, and it's really critical, because there is sort of a psychological aspect of this, where one goes into no self teachings and there's that great risk of sort of pushing stuff away that you're just not really shouldn't be forcing this stuff away. I mean, if it's going to peel away, it will do so on its own, but to sort of force this stuff away is really the wrong way of looking at it. And I guess that's the danger. So yeah, it's really, really, really helpful, I think, to have this concept at this point in time.
Thanks, Doug. Yeah, well put. It's yeah. So yeah, and the way it really has everything to do with how we operate in the world for the benefit of others and ourselves, while at the same time not being overwhelmed by the suffering that we see. A part of a Mary Oliver poem that says something, at least for me, about sort of how from the space of awareness that seems so big, right? It's really referred to as space. Personal concern seems so small that the self simply vanishes. Kind of like, I always think of the Mary Oliver's Butterfly. If you know that poem, it's just a piece of the poem. For years and years, I struggled just to live my life. And then the butterfly rose weightless in the wind. Don't love your life too much, it said, and vanished into the world. For years and years, I struggled just to love my life. And then the butterfly rose weightless in the wind. Don't love your life too much, it said, and vanished into the world. So we kind of vanish into our experience, into our activities in the world. So we're absorbed, you could say, wholeheartedly. We're wholeheartedly present in our activities in the world. We see the impersonal nature of experience. We struggle less, right? There's no grasping, pushing away. When there's less grasping and less struggle, there's more freedom. Yeah. I'll read one more quote and then open it for some questions. Padmasambhava, who brought Buddhism to Tibet, many of you know, in the 8th century, said, quote, though the view should be as vast as the sky, keep your conduct as fine as barley flour. I just love that. Though your view should be as vast as the sky, keep your conduct as fine as barley flour. So we're very careful. We're as careful as possible, very discriminating, discerning about what is beneficial, what is harmful. as we combined view and conduct. But we don't lose one in the other either, right? We mix them, but we don't lose one in the other. It's very important. It's really respect both of the truths. So this is really the gift of the no self teachings that can only be realized through experiencing them. So that's what we'll move on to as we kind of skip back into the progression now. I'm glad that some of you saw the sort of the reasoning behind me bringing this in now, but we will get back into the teachings around experiencing no self and the different aspects of it. Any other comments or questions? Yeah, Juna?
I'm not sure if anyone else has asked this, but I was kind of captured by that sutra about the lotus, the Buddha's silent sutra, where he just pulled the lotus from the mud and like showed it to everybody and he didn't say anything. And that was kind of the whole teaching. And Micah had said, no mud, no lotus. I remember when we were talking about that.
Yeah.
And I wonder in a way if that's not somehow kind of connecting with what we're talking about, like the relative and the absolute, if the lotus represents the absolute purity of existence, and yet he pulled the whole plant out to show the water and the mud and the relative aspect of that too, and that you couldn't just have the flower, you can't have the lotus without the mud. I don't know if that's something if that makes sense to anyone else, or anyway.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. That's beautiful. Yeah, it does. It makes total sense. Yeah.
I just had an anecdote. It makes sense to me. As I was biking last weekend, I came upon a little with a friend, a pond that had water lilies, and I thought just about that. And by the way, I wear it on my bracelet. That same. I thought, wow, that's it. I mean, it's no mud, no lotus. Yeah. Just a coincidence that this weekend I saw a pond and just reminded. I had to stop and take some pictures.
Thank you.
Are people familiar with the flower sermon of the Buddha, where he was what Juno and Giovanni were talking about is he had a large gathering of people, and they gathered to hear the Buddha to give a talk, the Dharma talk, and you can imagine all this mass of people coming for this Dharma talk, and the Buddha simply picked up this lotus flower dripping with mud and held it up, and that's all he did. That was the whole talk. And it said that the only one that got it was Sariputta. In the moment, understood and smiled. A smile came across his face, and was the one who understood, the simplicity of the Dharma talk. It's called the Flower Sermon if you're interested in looking it up more. Yeah, that's very much shows the connection. We often say in this group that the difficulties are the path. The mud is very much a part of the path. It's all interwoven with ultimate truth. is another quote I just love from Korean Zen master Sung San. He said, there's no right, no wrong. Everything is essentially empty. The right is right and wrong is wrong. So all these kind of, and you hear something like that, there's no right and no wrong. Everything is essentially empty, but right is right and wrong is wrong. Or Suzuki Roshi, you're perfect just the way you are, but you could use a little improvement. All these are just paradoxical, showing the paradox, right, of when we interweave the two. And a lot of the questions that come up in this practice are trying to discursively understand the paradoxes that come up. And really, this is an invitation to, to allow not to try to think our ways out of these paradoxes, but to see the true nature of everything that's arising, of what we're calling conventional reality, to see its true nature. And in that, we can see the truthfulness, the truth behind these statements, because ultimately there's no right and there's no wrong, right? There's no dualism in the ultimate reality. But in the conventional reality, right is right and wrong is wrong. Harmful is harmful and non-harmful is non-harmful in the relative. So that you have to see, to be able to live both those truths is when we see the tantra, the interwovenness, the weave of the two truths, which is really one truth. Yeah. So I don't know what time is winding down. I don't know what we'll do next. I forget what I have on the schedule for next one, but I'll try to get an email out a little earlier. We had a lot of guests up at the cottage. Actually, we have a lot of guests up at the cottage this weekend too, so I might be a little late getting. Seems like the relatives are all visiting, which is great. We're seeing people we haven't seen in a few years, so it's nice. So I will try to get the talk up and get an email out, but it will be on experiencing no self in some regard. Yeah, it was great seeing you all, and thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you,
Bye,
Steve.
everyone.
Thank you, Stephen. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.
Bye.
Everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Stephen.
Be well, everyone. Take care.
Realize how dark it was in here. Beautiful sunset.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it? Yeah. I'm down in the basement.
Yeah. I can sort of see it in behind the trees. I see pink.
Yeah, nice.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I totally missed last week. I was moving. My mom, she was moving into a bigger apartment to get a better view. So we were exhausted and I totally didn't.
Yeah.
Oh,
It is up on the website now. I just put it up yesterday. So if you want to watch it.
yeah, I think I'm going to watch this one again. There's a lot to think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So how's your practice?
I think it's going pretty well in the sense that I'm really, I talked last time about something you said, I think it was the last session I was there, about not, I can't remember the words now, but not sort of, I would not, I don't even have the words now. It's been in my head a lot, but when I have these perspectives or perceptions or these thoughts or these assessments of things, this is how it is or whatever, it's not it's not me. And so I need to look up my notes again, but to see, I'm conscious of having thoughts and perceptions and experiences that can make me think that, you know, that then I make a judgment or an assessment of it and say, oh, that's great, or oh, more often than not, drags me down and says, oh, you know, that's what a drag that is, or that's the way my life is, or whatever. And not noticing and saying, oh, well, no, that's just something that arose and it passes, and it's not me, it's not my life. I'm really noticing that I do that. And that was quite an epiphany for me.
Good. Yeah.
So it is a struggle, and it's sometimes, but it's very helpful. And somehow I sense that it dovetails with this whole practice of not self, because it arises and but it isn't part of, doesn't necessarily, I don't have to identify with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're seeing judgment. Give me an example of when a judgment arises.
Or a feeling. So when I say, well, let's say, you know, yesterday I had a stomach ache all day, and, you know, or something that tends to happened again. And so then I think, oh, there it is again. So that's just the way that, and that's like, oh, you know, so that's just going to be, I'm stuck there or something. That's, you know, rather than saying, you know, no, it's just arising. It just happened. And there's so much else that is part of, I guess, what happens. And so there's no, I guess I tend to get dragged down by the negative, I suppose, or preoccupied by the negative.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's that negativity bias that we have, right? That's why we're alive, because our ancestors had a negativity bias and stayed alive, and they passed that down through our DNA. So yeah,
I
just
extrapolate the big to the general and say it's like this.
Yeah. So therefore I am blank.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is the way it is. And so there was a phrase that I wrote down, and it resonated. It's I don't have to identify with it, or it doesn't have to define. I'm seeing that I do this, and that causes a lot of suffering.
Yeah.
And needless. And it's not easy, because it's a habit of mind, but it's also, it's the mud that makes the path, right? It helps me, it's helping me see. It's an example of what people do to cause suffering, what I do to cause suffering.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a teacher. Yeah. So it's it's good. It's easy right now because everything is easier. You know, it's easier to be more positive, but it's also still I still have negative thoughts or experiences occasionally. Nothing's ever perfect. And so it's easier to be more philosophical about it, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, everybody will always have negative thoughts will arise.
Yeah. And it's these perceptions. And I guess it's not unique. And I believe I realized that, but it's how much one attaches or gets. I'm seeing too much attachment, too much iteration in that rut.
So it's not just a thought that's arisen, it's a believed thought.
Yeah. That's so recurrent that it's believed.
There's your practice. So you can notice thoughts. Thought has no effect whatsoever. If it's just noticed as a thought. It's just a blip of energy passing through. Right? I think a thought is nothing. It's just a blip of energy passing through. The only power it has is when you believe it.
Yeah.
So as you said, you attach to it, but you believe it.
Believe it.
A belief
Right.
thought now has power. So you can actually just notice, oh, there's a thought. Oh, there's a thought. Oh, geez, that thought has some juice. I seem to believe it. Interesting. And see how it affects you. And you can really watch this in real time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Observe the whole process and see it for what it is.
Yeah. And that's something that I need to do. That's, I find it helpful to do this and
Yeah.
to work with it, to see it and work with it. And so that's kind of been my focus since that last time.
Yeah. So you can see the ultimate truth of a thought.
And the relative, which is the lived experience and what happens, and that it happens to others, and there's compassion and opportunity for that.
Yeah.
In the same time, and how to live in the mud while you're trying to also live in the ultimate.
Yeah.
Which is I that's sort of maybe what I got out of today, but I'm still not sure of myself.
Mm-hmm. No, it sounds like you received the message. Yeah.
Gina's analogy helped very much.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Good. I'm glad. Yeah. Good. Well, it sounds like just keep doing that. And that's an ongoing practice, what you just talked about. You can do that throughout the day, or you can do that during your yoga, or you can do that when you just sit, because you'll probably have lots of thoughts when you just sit. And then do a meditation.
Lots of opportunity.
Yeah, so you can
Mind
actually
go.
observe thoughts and whether they have juice or not, and what happens when they're believed thoughts versus what happens when they just pass through.
Yeah. This series is really different. I'm because when I first came to your sessions when we were at the school or the church or whatever it was, and we did no self, and it was a completely different experience for me than this one.
Yeah, good.
This is really,
Yeah.
I feel like you're bringing us along in a way that is much more, I don't know, I think it's we're more able to follow. It's good.
Yeah, it's more experiential because I have had more experience with it since I last taught. Yeah, this kind of series.
Yeah.
Very,
Great.
yeah.
I can see that. Thank you. It's wonderful.
You're welcome. Good to see you.
Likewise, Stephen. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.